Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. And this is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror and what we now call the Long War. We're going to go to a different theater. We are going to discuss the absolute chaos that is happening right now, that is unfolding before our eyes in Israel. You know, unless you've been in a bubble or slept in and not aware, Hamas, Palestinian Jihad, and other terrorist groups have launched attacks on inside of Israel. They breached the border fence. They launched thousands of rockets and mortars. Last I've heard, over 100 Israelis dead, 900 wounded, unknown number of Israeli citizens kidnapped and taken back into Gaza, military bases attacked. Absolute game changer. I don't think things in Israel with the Palestinians is ever going to be the same. So a quick programming note, we're recording this just about noon Eastern on Saturday. Obviously, the situation's developing quickly. We're going to push this podcast out quickly. I have my friend, colleague, and I'll say friend again, Joe Truzman. He is a research fellow here at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Joe has his finger on the pulse of all things Israel and beyond. Joe, welcome to Generation Jihad. How are you doing today? I know you must have gotten no sleep last night, right?
Hey, Bill, thanks for having me. Yeah, very little sleep, just tracking this amazing development that has happened in Israel, specifically in southern Israel, but it has also affected other parts of the country.
Yeah, it's look, I've been there. I know where you are. You're going to be you're exhausted now. It's only going to get worse, Joe, but just hang in there. And this is what they pay us for. Hopefully it's short-lived, but I have a feeling the way things have developed and some of the things that we'll talk about, I think is going to tell us this isn't going to be a 3-day Israeli action to just punish Hamas. I think we're going to see this develop. But before we get into that, and we'll just briefly touch on the possible future as we go forward. But tell us what's happened, Joe. I gave a real quick rundown there, but give us your perspective on this. What do we know as of 12 Eastern on Saturday, October 7th?
Yeah, of course. So, so early this morning, local time in Israel, the rockets were fired by Palestinian armed groups. And this is massive rocket fire. This wasn't just a couple rockets. We're talking hundreds and then more than 2,000 at Israeli cities. And I'm not saying just Israeli cities near Gaza, cities in like Tel Aviv, for example, and other areas of central Israel. While this was happening, paragliders from Gaza landed inside southern Israel.
Absolutely insane, Joe.
Yes. Yeah. No. It's. There's video of it on social media, but yeah, paragliders landed inside of Israel, southern Israel, in several Israeli communities adjacent to the Gaza border, including one of the major Israeli cities in southern Israel, Sderot, and attackers, or rather armed terrorists belonging to Hamas, started to shoot civilians that were out on the streets. On top of the paragliders, the military terrorists rather also infiltrated the security fence. And when I say security fence, there's a barrier, right? There's sections along the Gaza-Israel border. Some sections are a huge wall, okay? Other sections are security fence. This section, a section of the security fence was breached using wire cutters and explosives. When after the security fence was breached, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups or members of terrorist groups started hauling butt inside of Israel and using mostly motorcycles and pickup trucks. The thing is, these Israeli communities can be maybe a kilometer away from the Gaza border, so they can get there very quickly. Okay, and this is what happened. So they started. I can't tell you how many terrorists successfully entered Israel, but it was a significant amount.
It
And
had to be, Joe. It had to be significant given, right? There's videos out there of Israelis being rounded up, women and children, and being ushered back over into the border. And I'll ask that question of how the hell does that happen? Sure, they got in, but how the hell did they get out? We'll ask that question later. We don't have an answer for that, unfortunately, but maybe I won't ask it, and we'll just leave that as a rhetorical question at this point. But go on, Joe. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, no, but yeah, so this was just, but it wasn't just okay. So we talked about the paragliders, talked about infiltration of the security fence, but there were also it was a coordinated, multifaceted attack. So also there were attempted infiltrations from the sea, all right, and drone attacks, drones that are used, that are developed by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and other Palestinian armed groups. They also attacked during this event. They attacked IDF military bases during the infiltration. So basically, what happened is that the rocket fire, the massive rocket fire that initially started this whole conflict, was just a cover. The goal was to infiltrate Israeli territory and kill as many Israeli civilians as possible, which happened, and abduct Israelis and IDF soldiers into Gaza to use as bargaining chips for Palestinian prisoners of war. And unfortunately, soldiers and civilians were abducted, including this includes elderly people, mothers, children, men. It was frightening. It's really frightening. So there are civilians and IDF soldiers right now trapped inside of Gaza that were abducted from their homes by Palestinian gunmen.
Absolutely insane. Joe, you just described you said it, but you just described a highly sophisticated attack on Israel that was planned by Palestinian terrorist factions. And one of the first questions, and again, it's going to be a rhetorical question here because we don't know the answer now, but how did they stage the launching of thousands of rockets without being seen by the Israeli Air Force? I mean, that is stunning to me in itself. And I know the Israelis are constantly flying surveillance over Gaza. I just feel like, they really caught the Israelis with their pants down here. I don't. It's too soon to sit here and say, how did it? And this is an intelligence failure without a doubt. We're not going to get into that here at this point in time. Joe, I also heard reports, and this was, I believe, I read it in the Jerusalem Post, that there were multiple attacks on IDF bases in the area. I've read one report of communications being lost with one of those bases. So, can you tell us more about that? Are those credible reports? What do we know?
Yeah, I believe the reports are credible. From the evidence that I've seen, it certainly appears that the one of the objectives of the attack was to infiltrate Israeli bases along the Gaza border, and it does appear that Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups, were successful and were able to kidnap IDF soldiers and kill IDF soldiers as well inside the bases. And I just kind of want to go back to what you were saying earlier about how this could all happen. And I'll tell you this: Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups have been practicing this scenario for a long time. Like, for example, raiding the security fence and or attacking an IDF tank and abducting the soldiers. It's the soldiers inside, which, by the way, did happen during this conflict, or what happened. It did happen. So this, even though this is all surprising, it isn't surprising. They've been practicing this, and they've published evidence in videos and statements saying they're practicing, that they're training for things like this. Uh, and I think this is something that the Israeli defense establishment has feared, but not from Gaza. I think it's from Hezbollah in the north, right? They've talked about paragliders infiltrating Israel, or Hezbollah commandos blowing up the security fence or the wall in northern Israel and taking over Israeli communities in northern Israel, right? But I don't think the Israeli defense establishment thought that this would happen in southern Israel by Hamas and other groups, but it did. It did, and it's all just it's incredible and disappointing and saddening. But this is where we are right now. So yes, and also I'd like to add, just from the reports I've read, let's say in the last half hour, 45 minutes, and from statements from Hamas, there are still active clashes between Israeli forces and armed gunmen belonging to Hamas and other groups inside Israeli territory, inside Israeli communities. So this isn't over. Okay?
This isn't. This wasn't five guys infiltrating on a paraglider, cutting through the fence. This is a significant force of. It has to be, giving the scope and scale of what we've seen in the continued fighting. Yeah, Joe, that's very, very disturbing. For our listeners, Joe and I actually recorded a podcast on the subject of Israel earlier this week, which we were hoping to release yesterday or today, which we had to put in the tank because this all blew up. And Joe was talking about many of these things, what we were describing here, how the fence was how they were practicing breaching the fences, developing their own drones, coordination with other terror groups. And so, yeah, it's a little frustrating when those things happen, but you'll just have to take my word for it. And Joe was very prescient on this subject. That's why I woke up this morning, saw what happened, and immediately texted Joe, even though he's 3 hours behind me. And sorry if I woke you up, Joe, but said, Joe, we got to jump on. We got to trash some work and get back on and talk about this. This is, look, everything's changed here. I'm trying not to get too far ahead, but I think the idea of a two-state solution, I don't see how there'll be any support for that in the Israeli populace. Any discussion of proportionality of response by the Israeli military has to be thrown out. This definitely has shaken it has shaken the Israeli state and the Israeli population to the core. I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this, have we, Joe? I mean, maybe the Lebanon war in 2006 might be the closest, but even then, I don't, I remember following and covering that. It was nothing like this. Nothing. This was a stunning penetration of Israeli security.
Right. Nothing like this on this scale. And there have been infiltrations, yes. Right? Yeah. There have been infiltrations. I mean, going back decades from from Lebanon, and but nothing like this. And yeah, this is a very well coordinated effort. This isn't just Hamas.
Yeah, you were anticipating what I was going to say. Tell them. Yeah. Let's talk about this. This Hamas didn't do this on its own. Palestinian Islamic Jihad didn't come up with this on its own.
Right. Yeah. So don't get me wrong. Hamas is leading it. I mean, they are the big guys here, but this isn't just like the one or two factions here. Just from the statements that I've read and the evidence that I've seen over the past 12 hours or so, more than 12 hours now, actually. There are multiple groups involved here, multiple Palestinian armed groups involved in the not only the firing of rockets, but the actual infiltration operation into Israel. So that's important to note. Also, I think that's very important, and we did talk about this during our in the podcast that we unfortunately had to tank. They're all connected to one entity, and that's Iran. Okay, Iran funds and arms most of these groups that are involved in the fighting. I cannot stress that enough. Actually, in July, I published a visual for Long War Journal making the connection or visualizing or showing the connection between these 19 armed groups. That's right, 19 armed groups that received funding and support from Iran to attack Israel. And this isn't just in Gaza, mind you. This is Lebanon with Hezbollah, Syria, and obviously Gaza, the West Bank, and some Iraqi groups that operate in Syrian territory. So this is a multi-front issue here, and as this conflict, and you did allude to it a little, Bill, but this is going to the Israelis are going to respond, okay, and I'm quite concerned that there will be other fronts involved. Okay. For instance, a few days ago, I'd say about 3 days ago, Islamic Jihad's Secretary General, Ziad Nakhala, he stated that there were new battalions of Islamic Jihad that had recently been formed in Lebanon, in Syria, and in the West Bank, okay? And I don't think it was a coincidence that he said that right before this massive attack against Israel. Okay, yeah, we know it's not a secret that Islamic Jihad, operates in Syria and Lebanon. That's known. It's nothing new. But still, it to me that looks like it seems like a warning, right? That this is going to be a multi-front conflict. I can't say for sure that will happen. I hope it doesn't, but I completely expect a massive Israeli response, especially towards Gaza, maybe including other fronts as well. So there's a lot to unpack here. We can sit here for hours and hours and talk about everything, what's going on and what may happen. But I think I just really want to hammer the point that Iran funds and supports these groups that are involved in the fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, I want you to, Joe published this report, Iran and its network of 19 terrorist organizations on Israel's borders. He published that July 17th of this year. It's a great visual. I highly recommend you head on over to longwarjournal.org and give it a read. It'll help you understand the threats, the multidimensional threats that Israel is facing on all of its borders. And, look, if Joe, Joe and I both, we have a suspicion, we have fears that this could expand. If it does, Israel's going to have a real fight on its hand. I think Israel is capable of it, but it's very difficult for the small state of Israel to sustain these types of wars and deal with the backlash in the international community. Look, Iran, in my estimation, it's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Quds Force, without a doubt, has a hand in this. I have followed IRGC Quds Force operations for decades now. It's how it worked in Iraq in supporting the Shia militias, which are now some of which are on the border in Syria with Israel. How it created them to be analogs to Hezbollah. And one of the things I've always warned about, which really seems to be fall on deaf ears, is that these groups have a lot of more recruiting potential with the perhaps 36 million Iraqis, where 50 to 60% of them are Shia. Just look at what the IRGC and Hezbollah was able to do with a population of 4 million in Lebanon. The IRGC supported the Taliban. I helped prove this in court, both the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. And look, Israel, that's the place where the IRGC really wants to take the fight. And the sophistication of the operation that we just witnessed and we're currently witnessing, I would be shocked if the IRGC did not have a hand in this operation. Any thoughts on that, Joe? And we'll wrap it up.
For sure. Yeah, Bill, you hit it right there. Listen, for years, I'd say 5-6 years, about the so-called resistance axis, right, have been making statements that they will unite and attack Israel. Okay, and this is the resistance axis, for people that don't know, or those groups backed by Iran. But there's, like, for example, there are the Syrian armed forces is involved, are a part of it. The Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi groups backed by Iran, Hezbollah, Gaza, blah 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 blah. So it doesn't surprise me. And in 2021, for example, there was credible evidence of coordination between Hezbollah, the IRGC, and Palestinian armed groups. There was, I think, our colleague John Shanzer wrote a great piece on a nerve center in Beirut that was run by Hezbollah, the IRGC, and the IRGC, and they were essentially advising the Palestinian armed groups during the 2021 Gaza war. And it would just surprise me that if they were not involved here. I mean, this was just too sophisticated, okay? There's just too many moving parts here, and too many groups involved as well. So, yeah, absolutely. I think the Iran, its proxies, and the groups that it supports are all involved. Now, I just don't know to what extent they will be involved, as far as, groups outside of Gaza. But again, the concern is that we'll begin to see rocket fire, okay, from southern Lebanon, for example, by Palestinian armed groups. They've, over the last couple of years, they've established themselves in southern Lebanon with the green light, of course, of Hezbollah, and have fired rockets at Israel. So I think when a ground war, or a massive response by the Israeli Defense Forces against Gaza occurs, which is actually happening already, I think, or at least in the beginning stages of it, it's very likely we'll see rockets from southern Lebanon, just because, I mean, these groups have done it already, and they're established here. And again, like I said earlier, Islamic Jihad stated that they formed battalions there. So yeah, that's a concern. And dragging southern Lebanon into this, especially Hezbollah, that's another huge problem, right? So I'm sure the Israelis don't want to do that. So we'll see how things play out. But there's so many things that can happen here, Bill. And it's just, all of it is just bad. Okay. There's no good ending. And the worst part of all of this is that Israel has to go into Gaza to try to get all those people back, all the civilians and the soldiers. They're not going to stand idly by. Okay. Just the videos, the evidence that I've seen, like I said before, just of children and mothers, it's just unbelievable. These people getting ripped away from their homes, thrown in the back of pickup trucks, driven into Gaza, while hordes of people inside Gaza are surrounding the vehicle, cheering and happy that there are Israeli captives in the vehicle. It's just, it's tough to see. It's tough to watch.
And Joe, like, that really gets to the Israeli psyche of they have a leave no man behind like no other. I mean, they've been willing to trade 100 convicted terrorists for the bodies of Israelis being held by terrorist groups. You can be sure that they are going to go in there and get them. Those videos are seeping into the psyche of the average Israeli citizen. And we're at a turning back point here for the Israelis. It's really difficult to unpack this, 12 hours, whatever the number of hours after the conflict begins. But I don't think we can just consider, business as usual from here on out from the Israeli side. Given what we've seen in these videos, it's just, I'm stunned. And it's very rare in this business where, I felt like I've seen it all. This I did not expect. I didn't expect to wake up to this, and I didn't expect to see, look, maybe Hamas figured this out. Maybe Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, maybe they've calculated and this is exactly they want. But if it isn't what they want, they're going to get it.
Oh yeah. This is definitely a game changer for sure. And
I think you put it far more succinctly than I did, Joe.
Well, yeah, it's but you know what, we can we can definitely do more podcasts and talk about
Absolutely.
this as the days as the next few days come along, because this is, I think this is going to be one of those long haul moments that this is not a conflict anymore. It's going to be a war.
Netanyahu used that word war. Our colleague John Sanser said that, right? He said, "Look, I've never heard this rhetoric being used by an Israeli leader when it comes to this conflict." So I think that's where we are. No, Joe, absolutely. We'll get you on in a couple of days. Let's see how this settles. Look, I've been where you've been. During the summer of the Afghanistan debacle, I slept a couple hours a night if I was lucky. I was actually trapped at my place in the mountains for a month. I survived on ramen and pizza. I ate like a college student, and I smoked way too many cigarettes, drank way too much coffee. Get a good meal, Joe. Grab those hours of sleep when you could get them. You're in it for the long haul, and we're here to support you. So good luck with everything. Good luck to you and your family, and to the people of Israel and to the people of Gaza and Palestinian territories who don't want to be caught up in this madness of a bunch of terrorists who continually inflame a conflict that Israel really wants no part of.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Joe. Good luck, Joe, and thank you again for joining us for this episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again. We'll see you all again soon.